What's up, YouTube? Sergio Becerra II here again, and welcome back to my channel. And today I'm going to be doing another book review. So if you saw my last video on the Plantagenets by Dan Jones, I've got two other books right here. Another one written by Dan Jones and another one by Allison, how do you pronounce it? Weir or Wire? And it covers like a continuation of the Plantagenet dynasty. So we're going to start off these are the two books that I have read. It's called The Wars of the Roses, The Fall of the Plantagenets, and the Rise of the Tudors by Dan Jones, and of course, also the Wars of the Roses. So this will be a continuation of the Plantagenet dynasty. So as we all know, Henry II was the first Plantagenet king, and then fast forward with Richard II, he's later deposed, and his throne is usurped by his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, who becomes Henry IV, who's part of the House of Lancaster. Now, so to cover this, so I'm going to cover this completely as much as I can, like before. And I apologize for the last video for taking too long, because there's just so much to write down and try to get these words out of my mouth as much as I can. So it starts off in the mid 15th century, and the king at the time is the incompetent and weak Henry VI, who is the grandson of Henry IV. Now, Henry VI's father, Henry V, was well remembered for his role in the Battle of Agincourt in France. Henry VI was actually the only living son that Henry V only had, and Henry VI was actually proclaimed king at 8 months old, but he wasn't fully crowned by the time he was 7. Henry VI, without a doubt, is actually one of the weakest kings that England has ever had. He's shallow, weak, and foolish. I mean, he's known to have like breakdowns, and then one point during his reign, he suffers something called a catatonic stupor, which is kind of like having a stroke. So Henry VI is not only weak, he's shallow, foolish. So I'm sorry to try to get these words out of my mouth once again. In other words, he's just completely weak, and he's constantly been under the control back and forth between his queen, Margaret of Anjou, also who is his French queen, and then of course Henry's cousin, Richard, Duke of York. I mean, the whole point of trying to control Henry VI, I mean, it was just plain and simple, just to get him to calm down and trying to get the country under control. But this has led to a feud between the Queen and the Duke of York. So while Henry's in a mental state, which would be a catatonic stupor, because at one point, when he learns that the territories that were under Plantagenet control are like completely lost by the French crown, even though Henry had been declared king of France and still had those territories when his father was king. So this now creates a problem within the country. You've got rebellion breaking out. You've got feuds between the Duke and the Queen breaking out, in which the Duke himself starts this feud, which would be later recognized as the Wars of the Roses because of the coat of arms they have. I mean, it's Richard's goal is to maintain control of the king, get him away from the queen as much as he can. But here's the thing: before Henry and Margaret even had children, Richard, Duke of York, was originally the heir to the throne. So his goal is to come in, support the king, try to be, what is it? I'm trying to remember what role he has. That Richard has been getting like back and forth. Lord Protector of the realm. So once Henry like recovers from his mental state, he's not as weak and foolish as he has been. And then finally, at one point, one of Henry's other cousins, the Duke of Somerset, he was originally put in charge in helping the king maintain stability within the country because he's a close ally and friend of the queen. One thing I forgot to mention from the beginning is that a rebellion breaks out, chaos erupts in London. So Henry not being able to maintain stability, the queen like steps in because Henry like runs away from England, knowing he's not capable of maintaining any kind of problem within his realm. So the queen like uh, stepped up, brought down the rebellion. But the queen, like her mother in Anjou, even though Anjou was actually a duchy, which her mother had ran, but as a queen, she like really not only put down the rebellion but executed a lot of English rebels that were just causing trouble because one of Henry's other allies, the Duke of Suffolk, ends up being beheaded by the rebels. Now, fast forward again with the feud between the Duke of York and then with the Queen. So not only does Henry and Margaret not only Henry and Margaret run away from London, they take up shelter in another castle. The Queen has a number of troops that are actually under the King's rule that takes over. I'm sorry. She rallies the King's own forces, goes after the Duke of York because the Duke is held up in another castle, unarmed, unmatched. So once battle breaks out, the Duke is quickly apprehended, like within hours, and he's beheaded. Then this later causes Henry to lose his crown by the Duke's only son, who becomes Edward the Fourth. Edward the Fourth, um, I would say so far is a good king. He managed to bring down every conflict, which started under both Margaret and the Duke of York. Edward the Fourth is actually the grandfather to Henry VIII. So once things settled down with Edward as king, money was starting to trickling in, and for those that sided with Henry, they had the choice: either you stand with him or you lose your head. They sided with Edward, and then and not only that, one of Edward's closest allies, which was his father's ally, that would be the Earl of Warwick, because he's known as the Kingmaker. He put Edward on the throne. But things, of course, get out of control because Warwick wanted to betroth Edward to a French princess, but instead Edward marries one of his own subjects within the nobility. Uh, that would be Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth Woodville, I'm sorry. So Warwick's doing everything he can to like really put a stop to Edward in the way how he's been backstabbed, and since Elizabeth Woodville's family is of a lower level nobility, Edward decides to like elevate them, has them married to other has Edward has people get married to those within the Queen's own family, but then Warwick, he decides to start taking matters in his own hands by getting back at Edward by executing members of the Woodville family. But then Edward, at one point, Warwick tries to depose the king. So Edward ends up having to leave into hiding with his own forces, leaving the queen to take shelter in a cathedral along with their children. So what does Warwick do? He takes Henry VI out of imprisonment and puts him back on the throne, but it doesn't last long because Henry VI has nothing been more but a total disaster. So putting Henry back on the throne doesn't last long because Edward returns back to London. He gets his crown back. He gets his queen back, and then Edward finally has a male heir to the throne, which I will also cover. So once Edward returns, Henry VI, he's back in the Tower, but without harm, just to keep Henry safe. But Edward ends up having him killed because Warwick put him back on the throne. Warwick, on the other hand, he goes to battle with Edward, and that's when Edward's own forces officially take out the Kingmaker. Warwick is out. Then Edward IV later dies. So his 12-year-old son is proclaimed Edward V. But things don't go well as planned because Edward's brother, that would be the Duke of Gloucester, Richard, who actually becomes Richard III. It was by Edward's wishes that he be made Lord Protector of the realm. But since Queen Elizabeth Woodville's family has control of the government, they decided to let 12-year-old Edward V take full control right away, with counselors helping him by all means. This doesn't sit well. It doesn't sit well with Richard, so he comes up with a plan to really take control of the realm, which would later have him proclaimed king. He takes out most of the Woodville family with lies of treason, and they're not being put on proper trial. No, they're just executed right away. What does Richard do? He puts both his nephews, Edward V and Prince Richard, which would be Edward IV's younger son. They're both put in the Tower of London because they're later recognized as the princes in the Tower. And here's another thing that Richard does. He lies to the nobility, saying that Edward and Elizabeth Woodville's marriage is illegitimate because Warwick had betrothed Edward to a French princess, which Edward didn't even know. So it would make both Edward V and Prince Richard illegitimate successors to the throne. So now, with that out of the way, and Elizabeth Woodville ends up going into a sanctuary with the local cathedral, along with her two daughters. That's when Richard finally makes his move and becomes king. He is the very last of the Plantagenet dynasty. As for Edward and young Richard, they're both killed in the Tower, no doubt by Richard's orders. Now, this brings us finally with Margaret Beaufort, who is actually the mother of Henry Tudor, who later becomes Henry VII, the first Tudor king. So, Margaret Beaufort gives birth to young Henry at age 13 because her husband had died in conflict, who was also the half brother to Henry VI. So she's been back and forth, showing allegiance to the last two monarchs. That would be Henry VI and with Edward IV, because once the Earl of Warwick puts Henry VI back on the throne, Margaret Beaufort returns back to Henry because that's who she originally aligned herself with before Edward took over. And even Henry VI even believed that for that 14-year-old Henry Tudor would one day become king. One thing I forgot to mention that not only was Henry VI weak, but he was actually known to be mad. At one point, when Margaret introduced Henry VI to Henry Tudor, who are actually half uncle, half nephew, Henry just believes within his own gut that Henry Tudor will become king, which ends up becoming true. But then things take another twist. Henry loses the crown yet again, and then has to go back showing allegiance with Edward IV. Even Edward agreed to giving Henry back his lands, which his mother wanted to retrieve. Once once Edward IV dies, and then things get out of hand because she's been married like twice already to Henry Tudor's original father, then someone else that was one of Edward's soldiers. Now she ends up marrying someone by the name of Lord Stanley, who is actually Richard III's personal advisor. Henry Tudor on the other hand, he's like in exile in France. It's like too dangerous for him to like return back to England. So Margaret at this point she's in a bind, I guess you can say. Things have just not been made more complicated. So there was only one option left: her getting married to Lord Stanley, even though Margaret Beaufort has money, and so does her third husband. She doesn't have to worry for like any financial support. Decide to send money directly to France into Henry's own hands and to lead an invasion to get Richard off the throne and put Henry Henry on the throne and to put Henry on the throne. Once Richard III learns about this, like he tells Lord Stanley, you better get your wife to cut it out like right now, because I will take out Henry Tudor. Henry makes his way back into England, so this now creates a conflict between Richard III and Henry Tudor, and you have Lord Stanley on standby once the once the battle broke out. Henry ends up becoming victorious because Richard is later taken out by one of his own men. That's when Lord Stanley snatches the throne from Richard and puts it directly on Henry's head, proclaiming him the new king, Henry VII, the first Tudor king. So at age so at age 42, Margaret Beaufort is now the mother to the new king. So shortly, so the thing about Margaret Beaufort, she was like one strong woman that did everything she can for her own son. In fact, Margaret ended up having to outlive her own son, and then but was also later present at the coronation of her grandson, who became Henry VIII, who died a few days after Henry's coronation. So there you have it. Margaret Beaufort, she's the one who like ends the Wars of the Roses, which started with Henry VI up until finally ending with Henry VII. So there you have it with these two books right here by both Dan Jones and Alison Weir. I apologize once again, knowing this took a while to get the words out on how the Wars of the Roses started. I had the same thing with the last video with the Plantagenets. So Plantagenet dynasty is gone, and here comes the rise of the Tudors, which I will all, which later I will also cover more history books. Um, of course, involving the English monarchy. Of course, there will be another video in later in time where I will cover Henry VIII, and of course the rest of the Tudor dynasty. So tell me what you think in the comments below. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and stay tuned for future updates. All right, that covers this video. Take care now. Bye.